Mm-hmm. Hey, welcome everybody to another exciting episode of Under the Dome. I'm your host Alan Ulrich here with Bob Rose. How you doing tonight, Bob?
I'm doing pretty good, Alan. I hope you were doing all right too. It's the dog days of January. So what are we gonna
Oh
do?
yeah, yeah. I watched. Let's see. I watched the Buffalo Miami playoff game, and I watched what was the ones on Saturday?
Jacksonville Chargers were late game. I
Yeah,
did watch all of that one.
I watched that one. What was the earlier game?
I'm drawing a blank, and I was in and I tuned in and out to
Yeah.
San Francisco, Seattle.
Okay, so I did watch that one, and I that was the first one I really sat and watched the whole thing. Um, but yeah, the and I watched a lot of the Chargers Seahawks game and not Seahawks Chargers um Jaguars game, and I just I just was flabbergasted at the ineptitude of the Chargers.
Yep.
But okay, I'm not a conspiracy theorist, but I'm gonna lay a conspiracy theory out. How do you go from picking off every pass? You're in the backfield on almost every play in the first half, and then all of a sudden you can't intercept a pass. You can't do anything offensively. I just I don't I don't get it. I don't get it at all. I know you're inept. I get that. You're an inept team, but it looked scripted to me. It really did.
Just about. And yeah, when that happens, and I know you know this, when that happens, that's usually a case of one team flat out making better adjustments than another team.
Mm-hmm.
And yeah, the other team just failing to adjust to the adjustments or to the momentum shift in the game. In other words, inept coaching. The Chargers have talent on their roster. I don't think anybody denies that. And I
Mm-hmm.
thought I gave Jacksonville a good chance to win this game, but I also acknowledged that the Chargers were the vastly more talented team, at least on paper. And yeah, they had more players on their roster with playoff experience. But on the other hand, the Jaguars had Doug Peterson, who I know you're not a fan of. I am.
Yeah.
I think we saw a Jacksonville team with the yips early on. And once they settled in, they just outplayed the Chargers. And give all the credit in the world to Jacksonville. When they did settle in, they were down by 27 points, and
Yeah.
they did not panic. And that's the mark also of a well coached and well disciplined team. I thought for sure. And I know this is an early segue into one of our topics. I thought for sure that because of the way they lost, that Brandon Staley would be hitting the unemployment line on Monday or Tuesday. I am
I
shocked
certainly
that the
did.
Chargers are keeping him.
Now they made Joe Lombardi the sacrificial goat.
Yeah,
And I would also want to fire the defensive coordinator because that
yeah.
defense just fell apart. And I think that's when it was most disappointing. I'm like, where's Asante Samuel in the second half? He disappeared. I mean, they were all over every route. I mean, I'm not going to say the game is scripted, but it sure looked that way. Just the way that game unfolded because of such domination in the first half, where you seemed to be the most prepared team. You knew everything they were going to do, and you were sitting on those pass routes, waiting for him to throw the
Hmm.
ball, and you took the ball away to just a collapse. And it was amazing to see. I just Minnesota. I didn't even watch that game because I knew Minnesota was a friggin' fraud. I'm not
Me
shocked by
too,
it.
but I did watch the first half, and then I tuned in and out, throughout the
Mhm.
second half, because I thought the Giants were going to get their comeuppance at some point, but
I did
like
too.
you, I have been saying every single week, the Vikings are frauds, and any team with Kirk Cousins at quarterback is not going to sniff a Super Bowl ever, ever.
Well, you figure teams started to figure out you take away Jefferson and they suddenly can't do anything in the passing game. Adam Thielen is not the Adam Thielen of a few years ago.
Nope.
Uh, Irv Smith is reminds me kind of his dad. Now, I like Irv Smith as a
Same.
player, but I mean, he just when he was with the Saints, you get a couple good plays out of him, but then he would just vanish,
Hmm.
and that's why I thought Wesley Walls outplayed him when he was with the Saints. It just I was not surprised by any of that. I was rather amused by
Same.
most of it. Um,
But I always like to see the Vikings lose. I especially like to see it in heartbreaking fashion. So I was happy with that
well,
outcome.
a third and 8 with your 4th and 8 with your season on the line, you throw a 3-yard pass. So that was always amusing.
Yeah.
You
Yeah.
know,
People talk about the Chargers charging, and they certainly did. That was Cousins cousining.
and they should have never been in that position. You're playing
No.
at home, and yeah. Here's the thing: the Vikings lost. In fact, they got one of their Super Bowls on TV right now. For you guys wondering what that is playing in the background, that's the last professional football game played at Old Tulane Stadium, Super Bowl IX. Um, that is the Vikings' third loss in the Super Bowl. So they've lost 4 Super Bowls. They've lost 5 NFC championships, and going back to the Hail Mary game, I think they've lost like 7 or 8 divisional round, and now they're losing in the wild card. Now, this is at least a third wild card loss I can think of. So yeah, it's Vikings are gonna Viking.
Hmm.
It really is. Um, yeah, and then last night's game, I didn't really watch that because I can't stand either team.
Same.
Um, the only things I did watch a little bit to see the missed extra points, 2 of the 4 missed extra points, which I mean, by the fourth one, um, and I did find it amusing to see Brady go out that way. He didn't quite
Yeah.
go out the way I wanted him to go out. Um, don't get me wrong, I love Dan Marino, but man, Marino went out the worst possible way.
Yep.
A
And that's the
great
way throughout Twitter, when everybody was saying, I love seeing Brady go out this way, I'm thinking to myself, I don't. I wanted to see him go out the way Marino went out.
Yeah, Marino and Jimmy Johnson.
Yeah.
Jimmy Johnson never coached again
Yeah,
after that.
that's right.
Yeah, Mayor. All right, I know they say Maye, but it's Mayor.
Yeah.
I don't care how he wants to change his pronunciation. It's like Frankenstein, okay? And Igor. It's Mayor. So try and fancy it up all you want. But yeah, do you remember he was a kicker for the Saints, one of the 4 kickers I think they had last year.
Yep.
So, yeah, my daughter had to show me that thing. He's done that several times. That's the first time I think he really got caught doing that. Because the guy fell. But I've seen Brady on the slide kind of kick his leg up a little bit to kick somebody in the face. That's that kind of bullshit with Sub-Zero sidekick. Yeah. Somebody should yell on the stadium, finish him. But so the playoff games I'm really going to watch are going to be this weekend. This coming weekend, I want to watch the Bengals and the Bills. That's the game probably to watch and see how they play in that game. Jags, Chiefs. I really expect the Chiefs to roll the Jaguars because I think the Chiefs. The problem with the Chiefs is they're so talented and are so good that they actually get bored and make sloppy plays and lose games because they're not dialed in.
Yeah.
So The interesting thing for the Chiefs is, you know, number one, how long do they stay dialed in? Do they come out dialed in, or do they start playing sloppy and then decide to make the big comeback and fall
Yeah.
short? And the other thing is, you know, what are the how do the Jaguars respond to an emotional win? I mean, because and I know it's probably my bias against Peterson, but it's like I feel like the Jaguars really didn't win that game so much as the Chargers threw it away. You
Mhm.
know, so I mean, yeah, the Jaguars obviously made the plays to win the game, but it just felt like, if the Chargers would have put out even just a half effort in that
Mhm.
second half, they probably win that game because you get up 27-0.
Right.
Um, no, I know Calvin's comment. Giants over Eagles. No, I think the Eagles are. You're playing in Philadelphia. They know the Giants. They know what it is.
Yeah.
So,
I,
um,
I'll tell you, I'm going back to Chiefs Jaguars, and I agree with you. I see the Chiefs winning it by at least a couple of scores. Uh, but the interesting thing, and you sort of touched on this.
mhm,
Andy Reid teams, going back to his days in Philadelphia, Andy Reid teams, when they lose in the playoffs, it's because they overlook a scrappy team that
mhm,
simply doesn't match them talent wise on paper.
yep,
So if the Chiefs don't come out dialed up in this game, and it's close, the longer it's close, the more I actually favor the Jaguars, even though it's going to be in Kansas City, and the Chiefs have all this playoff experience. I've just seen Andy Reid teams blow it
oh
in
yeah,
the fourth quarter against teams that they should have wiped the field with too many times.
yeah. Especially if they're too busy focusing on who's going to win the Bengals Bills game,
Yeah,
because I think that could also hurt them because if they overlook the Jaguars could sneak up and get them. But I think that, yeah, they probably. You're right, Matt. They are good after a bye, but um, but yeah, they should win this game easily. Eagles, I think they want this game. Now, I don't think the Eagles going to the Super Bowl. I'll be honest with you, and I think Jalen Hurts' health is going to determine um, how well they play against the Giants.
yeah.
If he is still gimpy out there, uh, and he can't run, the Eagles are kind of in trouble with the Giants. But I still think they're talented enough to beat the Giants. I just don't know if they're going to be good enough to beat the 49ers. Brock Purdy aside, I just think the 49ers defense is probably the best defense in the whole playoffs, all
Yeah.
the teams, and going back to the wild card round.
Yeah, and
I,
frankly, I don't think it's close either. And there are good defenses in these playoffs, but I think
yeah,
the 49ers are just that much better than everybody else on that side of the ball. And offensively, as long as you don't put Kyle Shanahan in a pressure packed fourth quarter situation,
mhm,
he's got weapons everywhere and he knows how to use them in different ways to keep defenses off balance.
yep. Yeah. So if Jalen Hurts can't run that well, and then he has to play the 49ers defense, they're in big trouble.
Yeah.
And I think that's where the Eagles will get exposed. I think that's where the 49ers have a good chance to beat them.
Hmm.
Uh, I think the 49ers defense, I mean, the Eagles defense is good,
Oh, yeah.
but I think the weapons that they have will be too much of a challenge for the Eagles defense to keep up with.
Hmm.
So
And
that,
that's if the 49ers even get past the Cowboys. And I do think they will.
yeah.
But I'll tell you, if you look at the matchups on paper, Dallas matches up really well with San Francisco on paper.
Mhm.
Now, we know Mike McCarthy, we know Dak Prescott, their history in playoff games. So they're going to have to overcome themselves,
Mhm.
including against many of these same 49ers players from last year that knocked them out. But
Yeah.
Dallas matches up really well. I would not be shocked if the Cowboys won this game, but I'm going to go with the 49ers out of the NFC. I
I
think
don't.
they're that good.
Yeah, I don't trust Dak,
Mm.
and I don't trust McCarthy to do the right to manage the game properly against the 49ers. honestly, because I think, the kicking problems last night were amusing. But kicking problems aside, I just think that Dak makes those critical mistakes that a team like the
Mhm.
49ers can exploit.
Yeah.
If the 49ers can get turnovers out of the Cowboys, 49ers win the game big.
Oh yeah.
Can't get the turnovers, then it becomes more of a challenge because I think the deeper in the playoffs Brock Purdy goes, the greater chance it is that he gets exposed. But right now, he's playing like the Nick Foles life.
Yeah.
Nick Foles, and for those of you who are old enough, Jeff Hostetler, you
Mm-hmm.
know,
Or
he's
before that, and you
playing
have the background up. Vince Ferragamo for the Rams
Vince
came out of
Ferragamo.
nowhere after Pat Hayden went down.
Oh yeah, oh Vince Ferragamo, and every time I see Vince Ferragamo, the weird thing, of course, I love the movie Heaven Can Wait with Warren Beatty.
Mm-hmm.
That movie came out in 1978.
Yeah.
Okay, one of the plots of this movie, one of the stories about this movie, is that the owner of the Los Angeles Rams dies mysteriously. Carol Rosenblum died at sea. His wife took over the team, and Miss Georgia Fontier, and the Rams go to the Super Bowl on the arm of a backup quarterback.
Mm-hmm.
And then here comes the movie Heaven Can Wait. It has that plot basically a year early. And who do they show in the footage when they're watching the Super Bowl? They're playing the Steelers
Yep.
in the Super Bowl, in the Rose Bowl. Of course, they didn't actually film it in the Rose Bowl. They filmed it in some high school stadium. It looks pathetic, but yeah, but then of course, in that movie, the Rams win the game
Mm-hmm.
with the backup quarterback. But yeah, it's always I get a kick every time I watch that film, of just the weird parallels of that movie to what really happened in football. So you see, John Butler, it was scripted all the way back in the 70s. Sorry.
That was when Goodell was the puppet master, though. He was working behind the scenes.
He was playing three-dimensional chess, man.
Yes.
And one day I'm going to have to talk about this on the show, about the impact that former Rams owner Carol Rosenblum had on the New Orleans Saints and why the Saints under John Meekum kept getting screwed.
Yeah.
Because it's rather shocking. And you have to go back to when Carol Rosenblum owned the Baltimore Colts and the Ursays owned the Rams, and he did a swap of ownership. They swap teams. They'd never allow that today, but they just basically gentleman's agreement. We swap teams.
Yeah, and it was a deal made in a bar. That's true. True 70s, 60s and 70s lifestyles.
Yeah. But you look at the trades the Saints made and how many benefited first the Baltimore Colts and then the Los Angeles Rams. And the 1980 season happened for the Saints, the 1-15 season happened in large part because Carol Rosenblum drowns at sea. And before he died, he asked his good buddy, John Meekum, take care of my son, Steve, if something would happen to me.
Mm-hmm.
And sure enough, not long after he drowns, Georgia fires Steve Rosenblum, who was a GM of the Rams, and John Meekum brings him in to the Saints in 1979. And the problem with that was that when he hired Dick Nolan in 78 to be the head coach of the Saints, he hired him as head coach and GM.
Mm-hmm.
So you basically hired a guy to do the job of somebody else, that somebody else was there. And rather than rearrange the organizational structure, he asked Nolan, just give him a little something to do just to justify him being there, but you're really the GM. And that division of power was a big reason, that and the cocaine, but that division of power was a big reason why that team went 1-15 in 1980. Yeah. Yeah. No, I don't know about that. But yeah, Cal Rosenblum was the reason why the Saints traded them one overall pick in '67 for Gary Quazzo,
Yep.
and the Baltimore Colts took Bubba Smith. Hightower, for those of you who remember Police Academy, that's one of my favorite scenes when Hightower, Bubba Smith's trying to learn how to drive that little bitty car. He rear ends that guy. That guy comes out all pissed off, throws open the door. Bubba Smith is driving from the back seat.
Yeah.
Oh, that's a great film. If those of you who are too young, y'all need to go watch the original Police Academy.
The first two. After that, it got stupid.
Yeah. But the first, yeah, Michael Winslow with the sound effects, just the whole thing. It's well worth watching. Yeah. Speaking of head coaches and deals, so Sean Payton has been dominating the news. At least 3 teams are interested in interviewing him: Arizona, the Arizona Cardinals, Denver Broncos, and now the Houston Texans. Carolina has asked for permission to interview him, which the Saints have granted. But Carolina has also asked to interview the defensive line coach or defensive co-defensive coordinator. Not Ryan Nielsen, but the other one,
Chris Richard.
Chris Richard, because the Falcons have asked to interview Ryan Nielsen. Now, both those guys are under contract, so the key for them to be leaving, for the Saints not to be able to block them, is they have to get promotions. So they have to be promoted to assistant, like a co-head coach or something to that effect. So I'm not so worried about those guys right now. But I did find it interesting the Saints did give permission to Carolina to interview him. Yeah, I know that. Yeah, the Falcons interviewed Jim Haslett for defensive coordinator. I think they were also going to interview Greg Williams. I'm like, oh yes, please interview, please hire those guys.
Now the thing about Nielsen and Richard that I don't know, and it sort of concerns me, the fact that they are co-defensive coordinators. Does say Nielsen, either one, but we'll just say Nielsen gets offered the job as Atlanta's defensive coordinator. Would it still be considered a lateral move, since now he's solely operating the defense, whereas in New Orleans he's co? I've looked since the news came out that he was interviewing. I've looked and nobody has been able to give me an answer to that. Even if it would be considered a lateral move, you're right, Alan. The way franchises get around that is just Ryan Nielsen would be defensive coordinator and assistant head coach. An extra title. For you guys that are Cheers fans, go back and look at the episode where Rebecca kept throwing titles at Woody Harrelson and Carla Tortelli rather than give them raises. So it's a matter of play on words, but I'm very interested to see how that one works out.
I think that the Saints, if they're going to grant permission to interview, they feel pretty confident they can hold on to those guys. But they're not going to block them from just seeking other opportunities. But I think they would probably deny the hiring if they felt like they could hold on to those guys. They want to hold on to those guys. But let's go back to Sean Payton for a little bit, okay? Fans, if you read social media, fans seem to think we're going to get like a Herschel Walker type of trade for Sean Payton, and they keep going back to the John Gruden, I guess, template. And I think, to borrow a line from Larry David, we need to curb our enthusiasm on this. I do believe, and I think the Saints have made it publicly known. Sean Payton said this on Coward's show the other day. He expects at least a first-round pick this year, which is reasonable. And I would expect a first-round pick and probably a conditional pick next year, depending on how the team does and where they could be picking. If he goes to a team like Oh, Denver, you probably get the 49ers pick,
Yep.
and then you probably get a conditional second or third round pick that, depending on how the Broncos finish, could flip into a first rounder or third to a second rounder. Okay, just just for an argument's sake. Um, Cardinals the same way. The only problem with the Cardinals is no way on earth they're giving up that number 3 overall pick.
Nope.
So you're probably looking at probably a second round pick this year and probably a first next year.
Mm-hmm.
That's probably the kind of compensation you're looking at there. So that brings the Texans into play, and that's what that's this story. That's what Jimmy Gumbo is asking. The Texans are interesting because they have 2 first rounders this year and 2 first rounders next year. And if I'm a Saints front office person, I'm Mickey Loomis, I'm like steering Payton towards the Texans and trying to talk him to go into the Texans. Matt says that the 12th overall pick and probably a third or a second round pick. This is what would be interesting to see. What do you think would happen if we can get the Texans?
First of all, like you said, just like with the Cardinals at number 3, take the Texans number 2 overall pick off the table. That's not realistic, folks. The only way you're going to get a top 10 pick for Sean Payton is if the Carolina Panthers actually have a chance at getting him, because the Panthers have the 9th overall pick. And if you're going to trade Sean Payton within your division and have to face him every year, it's going to take, if you're Mickey Loomis, it's going to take a hell of a lot more to get him. So that hell of a lot more would certainly include the 9th overall pick. I still don't think it's realistic. I still just think they're granting Payton an opportunity to interview with Carolina to hopefully drive up the asking price of the other franchises involved. Denver, Arizona, Houston, and whoever else might throw their hat into the ring. But Houston, compensation wise, they easily have the opportunity to blow everybody away because they do have that number 12 pick, which is higher than what Arizona's second pick would be, higher than what Denver's first pick would be, because that first round pick from the 49ers was going to be no better than the 24th overall pick. And that's if San Francisco loses this weekend. So you're looking at the Texans having an advantage that way. I think ultimately it's going to be 2 to 3 draft picks to get Payton. There is going to be a first rounder involved, but it might not be a 2023. It might very well be a 2024. If it's a team like Arizona, Arizona is a great example. Since they're not going to get the number 3 pick, you get Arizona's very high second round pick and a first round pick next year. If it's Houston, maybe you get their number 12 this year and a number 2 next year. And I said 2 to 3 draft picks. Somewhere in there too is where your conditional value, a third or a fourth round pick, comes in, depending on where they finish. But I have little doubt that at the end of the day, unless teams start backing off, like too rich for our blood, either Payton's contract demands or your trade demands. If teams start dropping out of the conversation, that's when we need to start getting really worried as Saints fans that you'll be lucky to get a first out of Sean Payton. But I do think ultimately the Texans, compensation wise, have to have the lead. We don't know how Sean feels about going there, because that's going to be the ultimate deciding factor too. At the end of the day, at least as it stands right now, I think the Saints will get a first, a second, not in the same year, as I said, and a conditional late day 2, early day 3 pick out of this.
And you got to also look at it from the standpoint of the fan base and the franchise you're going to go to. A lot of people are like I said, they want a Herschel Walker type of deal where they just take a team to the cleaners. The only team you're going to take to the cleaners is going to be Carolina. And that's because they're in your division. You're trading in your division. Okay. For a team like the Texans have 2 firsts this year and 2 firsts next year. So that gives them a lot of flexibility and an ownership that needs to make a splash because he's got a big stadium he's got to fill. He's in a very weak division. You know, the Titans seem to be fading. Jaguars are an up and coming team, but you know, in Indianapolis is a train wreck. So you know, you have a good shot of building something. And this is the other part that people don't get. That franchise that gives up all those picks for Peyton, what is he going to be coaching then? He's
Exactly.
coaching scrubs. So Peyton is going to want to go to a team that has a lot of cap flexibility, that has a lot of draft picks, and has some young talent that he can build around. Doesn't have to be, we're all assuming it's got to be a young quarterback. But look, if the Texans have two firsts next year, they got a first this year, and it's the number 2 overall pick. You got a shot at Bryce Young. You have a shot at C.J. Stroud.
Right. That's your quarterback.
Yeah.
Peyton needs an answer at quarterback, which is what you're saying.
Yeah.
A lot of people are assuming he needs a quarterback in place. And I think it's very mistaken to assume that. I agree with what you're saying, and I've been saying it too. Peyton just needs an answer at quarterback. The Texans, with that number 2 overall pick, that's your answer at quarterback.
Right. And let's just say, for the sake of argument, that he doesn't even go for a quarterback this year. He goes and signs Jimmy G, okay, as his quarterback.
Which he loves, who he loves.
Right. So he burns his number 12 pick this year to get him, get to the Texans. Saints have the 12th overall pick. He's got 2 picks next year. If he just finishes close to 500, he can take those 2 first rounders, package them together, move up, and get a shot at Caleb Williams the following year, whom he loves. Okay, so
who he's actually on record in an interview saying, I expect teams to tank for Caleb Williams. Well, if Sean Payton is coaching a piss poor franchise, why not that piss poor franchise tank for Caleb Williams? Right. Your other first round pick is the Cleveland Browns. You might not need to tank. You might have that pick fall into your lap and be a playoff team at the same time.
Absolutely. Absolutely. I mean, you know, so the Texans offer him an opportunity to get rich quick. They've got money. They got an ownership that's willing to spend money. You know, the question is that the kind of team he wants to go to? I think that's the real tough question. I think the Chargers have now put themselves completely out of consideration because they didn't fire Staley, which actually is kind of good because the Spanos family, I tweeted this, you know, the Chargers, except for a brief time when Gene Klein owned that team, the Chargers have been a disaster of a franchise for a long, long, long time. You know, Gene Klein owned that team. Gene owned them in the 70s all the way until the mid 80s. So he had the Air Coryell years.
And even then, he almost traded Dan Fouts because he wouldn't pay him above mid-level quarterback range for that time, which was less than $1 million per year.
Yep. Yeah. Because Archie was getting paid in 1980. Archie signed a contract, or 81, signed a contract with $500,000 for 5 years. You know, and Archie hadn't had a winning season yet, so he's getting paid $500,000, and hadn't had a winning season. Closest he got was 8-8. Okay, so yeah, easily he should have paid Fouts close to $1 million. Well, he let John Jefferson traded him to Green Bay, and traded his best pass rusher, Dean. He's in the Hall of Fame too.
Fred Dean, yeah.
Fred Dean, thank you. Fred Dean to the 49ers, and the 49ers used Fred Dean to help them win a Super Bowl. You know? So yeah, it's just prior to that, the Chargers were the team where the drug addicts went, where the problem children went, and where old players at the end of their careers finish their career at.
Yeah.
You know, John Unitas, Deacon Jones, they finished their career with the Chargers. You know, Emmett Thomas from the Cowboys, the problem child, he finished his career with the Chargers. So yeah, the Chargers were once you got past the AFL days, the Chargers of the early '70s, mid '70s were a disaster. Um, so what's that? Whoever got that second and third pick, getting Will Anderson, probably,
Hmm. Good shot.
probably. Well, here's the thing, and we're going to talk more about the draft and get closer. But the Bears, people they kind of toned it down. But in the beginning, they were all like, "Oh, they're going to trade Justin Fields because they're going to go get a quarterback in the first round." You don't have to get a quarterback the first overall pick.
Nope.
They could get a defensive tackle, they can get a defensive lineman, a pass rusher, they can get something that they need.
Yep.
You know,
Well, Indianapolis is sitting there at number 4. Indianapolis needs a quarterback. You
Yep.
get Indy's number 4 pick along with other picks to build your team around Justin Fields if you think Fields is the guy. So, I mean, the Bears are sitting in a perfect position.
Absolutely. No, so yeah, and there's a long way to go before the draft. I mean, we're basing all this off of talk about what we've seen based at the end of college football.
Right.
You've got the Senior Bowl, you've got Pro Day, you've got individual drills with players. You know, so there's so many things that are going to happen between now and then. Senior Bowl, hell, that's half the time where the Saints make a decision on a player.
Yeah.
Based on how they perform at Senior Bowl. That's where Penning came from. Penning was throwing people around like rag dolls at Senior Bowl.
Yep.
And so yeah, I agree with you, Matt. I'm doing the same thing. I don't know if the Colts are going to be that stupid. It depends on who they hire as a head coach. And that's one other thing I wanted to go back to. People are upset that the Saints haven't fired Pete Carmichael. They haven't gotten rid of a lot of the coaches and things like that yet. Your papa went there. I have a pennant from the Senior Bowl. He went to the Senior Bowl a couple of times. You also went to they don't play this game anymore, the blue-gray game.
I would have loved to go to that one.
Yeah, they don't play that game anymore. It's a shame because of the Confederate connotations and stuff like that. But they changed it to North-South for a little while, then it's gone.
Yeah.
But the blue-gray game was Southeastern teams, SEC kind of teams up against the big Northeastern players, Northern teams, and it was really good. Especially in the days where college football wasn't televised all the time. Yeah, I bet you do. My son's a frustrated scout. But one of the things that I was talking about as far as decisions the Saints are going to have to make with their coaching staff, if you're going to make the decision to pull the trigger and release Carmichael, and I think if they release Carmichael, they're just going to ask him to retire.
Yeah, kick him upstairs to a consultant or something. Yeah, something like that.
I mean, he is the longest tenured coach, or tied with the longest tenured coach in franchise history, right up there with Russell Paternostro, who was a strength conditioning coach from 81 to 96.
Wow.
Yeah. I mean, if you think about it, in the 70s, the average coaching lifespan with the Saints was about 3.5 years.
Yeah.
Now you to together. And because Steve Sidwell was gone before Carl Smith, and before Jim Mora was, they let Steve Smith go.
Yep.
Not Steve Smith, the drummer. Steve Sidwell. They let Steve Sidwell go when the Saints went to a 4-3 defense. They had Monty Kiffin one year for the Saints.
Yeah.
He was defensive coordinator when they went to a 4-3, because that was 95. I was at the draft thing, and I sat in a defensive scheme conversation with Monty Kiffin teaching the class, and that guy was crazy.
That would have been cool.
He's taking furniture, moving it around. He had chairs, folding chairs. He's moving it around, talking about how to do stunts and everything else. It was hilarious. But most Saints coaches didn't last that long. So I think for a guy like Carmichael, they're going to let him leave on his own terms. Even if they ask him to leave,
Mhm.
they let him leave as his own man. But that kind of dictates how you're going to approach free agency and how you approach the draft, because who your
Absolutely.
offensive coaches are will determine what kind of quarterback you need, number
Yep.
one. And number two, what kind of other offensive players are you going to need to make this work? And what's your philosophy? It seems that Dennis Allen is a power running offensive minded guy, but he may pick up a coordinator that says, no, 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 we can win by doing this, this, and this. Who do you see, or who would you like to see them look at as an offensive coordinator for the team?
I'm going to name teams rather than individuals.
Okay.
Because you're talking about, unless you're going to go after a guy like Frank Reich, a former head coach that's offensive minded. And I think if the Saints were going to do that, we'd have seen it done. We'd have seen Carmichael gone already.
Yeah.
Then you're going to see the next Saints offensive coordinator, if indeed they make a move. I'm getting worried that they won't. But if indeed they make a move, the next Saints offensive coordinator will be a position coach off a team that's probably currently playing. The 49ers, they have a bunch of highly regarded coaches. The Buffalo Bills and Kansas City Chiefs, along with the Cincinnati Bengals, have among the most explosive offenses in professional football. So you're going to you'll look for position coaches off one of those guys. So it's not going to be a household name. It's going to be a younger guy that's working his way up, much like Carmichael himself was when he came to the Saints back in 2006. Matt, look at the Jets offense. I'm not a big LaFleur fan. Plus, it's pretty much a given that he's going to end up on McVay's staff with the Rams. And Jimmy Gumbo, I know Joe Lombardi became available. Joe Lombardi might very well be just a younger version of Pete Carmichael. I like Joe too, and I wouldn't mind seeing that for nostalgia purposes. But I really do think that the next Saints offensive coordinator is going to be a position coach, maybe even off their own staff, because I know for a fact that they love Cody Burns. They brought him in from Tennessee last year. You have to love you could trash the offensive coaches all you want, and I have. But you have to love what Cody Burns did. I mean, not only look at Chris Olave, but look at what Rashid Shaheed has done. So you've got to believe that Burns is still held in high regard by probably Dennis Allen and most definitely Mickey Loomis.
Yeah, and that's why I was going to go with this, because a lot of people are seeing names come down, and my opinion on Lombardi is, I think Joe Lombardi is probably tapped out as a quarterback's coach, offensive assistant, not so much a coordinator, because this is the Joe Brady problem, and I'm going to have to start calling it that from now on, because I think Pete Carmichael ran into the same problem. Joe Brady can learn the offense. He can know the offense and design those plays, but it's about knowing when to call these plays. And I think that's where Joe Lombardi got in trouble. I think that's where Pete Carmichael gets in trouble. And I think that's where Joe Brady, when he got to the NFL, got in trouble.
That's problem A. Problem B has been my major problem with the entire staff all year long: the inability to make in-game adjustments. Since, like you point out correctly, so Payton was the de facto offensive coordinator. Lombardi, Brady, Carmichael, all those guys did a great job of designing the game plan and helping Payton design the game, and Breeze design the game plan during the week. But Payton was the guy that made Payton and Breeze were the guys that made the in-game adjustments, and that's what's been lacking on this staff for really 2 years now.
I can just think of when Peyton was mic'd up by NFL Films. Here he's looking at his play sheet, and he's telling Breeze what the play is, and then you hear him later. He says, "This is the look we want. This is the matchup we want. This is what we've been waiting for," and that's when he called the play. And always refer to this game because those idiots kept showing the Minneapolis Miracle the whole time before the playoff game for the Vikings the other day. But except for those last 10 seconds, that second half was sheer brilliance by Sean Payton and Drew Brees, calling plays and executing them. The only thing that went bad, hey, I'll take a beer if you're in your fridge,
Lauren's got some wine from a weekend get-together left over. You could have that.
I got you. But yeah, that's the thing about with the Saints and Sean Payton. He knew when to call these plays and when to set those plays up by doing things that fans in the stands are going, why are you running this? Why are you doing this? This is not going to work. Yeah, he knows it's not going to work, but he wants the defense to get used to seeing that, and they're going to do it. They're going to react the way he wants. And just like in the Atlanta game, where you go back to 2017 when Brees threw the pass to what was his name? The receiver that came from Carolina and Miami's first-round draft pick.
Again.
Yeah, Ted Ginn Jr. Okay. The defense ignored the clear-out route by Ted Ginn Jr. They rotated and came down heading towards Kamara because that's where they expected. They're going to be a swing pass to Kamara. So instead of throwing it to Kamara, there goes Ginn right across the middle, wide open. Breeze hits him, and he's gone. And it was a huge touchdown play.
Yep.
And it was the same look they gave over and over and over again. And the Falcons reacted just like how they expected. To me, that's what was missing. And that's what makes a good offensive coordinator instead of just a play caller.
Yep.
John, I think the bring in Coach Breeze crowd kind of died out with LSU's. I think they just scored another touchdown against Purdue. So, and I don't blame Drew. I mean, you can't blame Drew for that stuff.
No, I think Drew will end up being a position coach on Peyton's next staff, whether it's next year or the year after. Because going back to Peyton, wrapping up Peyton real quick, I'm beginning to believe that Peyton may stay in the broadcast in the Fox studio another year too.
Well, I think he really wanted that Chargers job. I think he really wants to coach Justin Herbert, and he wants to play in the AFC West. I think that's where his fantasy is. Take the Chargers from Clippers status and turn them into the Lakers. Sean McVay sticking around. Not that I thought he would want to go there because that's another team that has no draft picks, aging roster, a lot of money tied up in the salary cap, and you don't know what you're going to do with what you got. You're probably going to be a pretty bad team for a couple of years. Right. Because you put all your chips in for a Super Bowl. I don't know. Ronald Curry's interesting, but again, it depends on, to me, if you're going to pick your offense coordinator, you also got to look at your personnel.
Yes.
What kind of offense are you going to be running? You got two speed receivers right now. You really don't have a big tight end. You really don't have that big-bodied receiver, Michael Thomas, because we're all going to assume that Michael Thomas isn't going to come back with that kind of contract, and he's already renegotiated it. So I don't know. I don't know how this is going to play out with the offensive coordinator, because I think that's part of the decision-making process they have to make. Not only what kind of offense we're going to run, who are we going to build this offense around, So we've been kind of dancing around it, but real quick, before, it was the last part of the segment here. Let's look at this offensive or this coaching staff. How would you grade? This is such a trap question. Let's start with the defense. How would you grade the defensive coaches? Position by position, defensive line, linebackers, and secondary, and the coordinators, defensive coordinators.
I'm tempted to give the secondary coach because of the safety play. a lower grade, a D, but I'm actually going to give him a C because I thought that the cornerbacks played extremely well. And Alontae Taylor, even though he was a second round pick, not many of us expected much from him, at least in his rookie year. And we got a hell of a player. Anytime that you have the second ranked pass defense and you have the numbers completion percentage wise, completion rate wise that you do, when you're missing Marshawn Lattimore for 10 games and Paulson Adebo is in a slump, to say the least. I think that I think that you got to give props to the secondary coaches as well as the players on the field. The linebackers, I don't want to lose. If I had to lose one of the two co-defensive coordinators, I'm actually going to say goodbye to Chris Richard. I love Ryan Nielsen. Yeah. I love what he's done with the defensive line. You figure he has made undrafted players, Carl Granderson, Shai Tuttle, Malcolm Roach, into legitimate starting caliber defensive linemen. Not to mention the development of David Onyemata, looms big. So I love Ryan Nielsen over there. Chris Richard, I am a big fan of too. I just prefer Nielsen very slightly over the two. And I don't think linebackers coach Michael Hodges gets nearly enough credit. I've always thought he was a terrific coach. And again, you look at the development of Pete Werner. What was Demario Davis before he came to New Orleans? He was a good player, but really, Demario didn't achieve all-star status till he got here. You look at Caden Ellis, what he has done. Hell, Zach Bond had a couple serviceable games this year. So I think I absolutely love this defensive staff, up to and including Dennis Allen. Dennis Allen as a defensive guy, as a defensive mind, as a defensive coach, he is among the best in the NFL today. That's all there is to it. You say what you will about him as a head coach, and he deserves a lot of criticism. But as a defensive coach, Dennis Allen, Richard, Nielsen, Hodges, all those guys, I love them. So as a staff and the way the Saints defense played down the stretch, I'm not going to give them an A because you still finished 7-10 and you just didn't create enough turnovers. But I will give the defensive staff a B to a B minus, somewhere in that range.
And I totally agree with all the things that you said, the linebackers coach especially, because who's thought that Caden Ellis, a 7th round draft pick, I mean, we're talking Kobe Buckwald status, coming in and doing what he did. Pete Werner, a lot of fans hated that pick. They hated him coming in. They named about a half dozen other players we should have gotten instead of Pete Werner. And when Quan Alexander was not re-signed, they were mad. We're going to play Pete Werner over Quan Alexander, all that stuff. And, all he did was turn in a solid, really, really good linebacker position that, Demario Davis didn't stand out really. He was named second team All-Pro this week. He got his first Pro Bowl, and here we're all saying, he really didn't have that good of a year compared to previous years. So, and I think that's a testament to how well Ellis and Werner played, that we weren't seeing Davis make all the plays. Defensive line, I feel the same way with you about Chris Richard. You take Granderson, you take Shai Tuttle, Malcolm Roach, keeping Cam Jordan, in the condition he's in, because you look at a guy like Joe Johnson, you look at a guy like Cedric Ellis, even Charles Grant, they'd all have those big years and then they'd kind of really drop off. We have a steady climb, maybe a little plateau, but always a steady climb for Cam Jordan. So that's a tremendous thing. And I agree with you totally with Dennis Allen as a defensive minded coach. It's frustrating because he gets too confident in his own defense and doesn't take chances, doesn't take risks because he feels like I can limit my defense. And, part of it is because of the ineptitude he has seen in his offense, but also part of it is his basic coaching, he's not aggressive. And I think if fans have a complaint about Allen, that's pretty much universal. After Sean Payton, you want to see that aggressive mentality continue. You want
Yeah.
to see him, okay, if you believe in your defense, then hell, go for it on fourth down. Just go for it on fourth down because you know your defense can stop them.
Yeah.
Okay. And I give the secondary coach, even though a huge knock because he didn't get enough turnovers, but he did actually figure out what to do with Tyrann Mathieu towards the end of the season.
Mm-hmm.
You kind of use him the same way that we used to use Chauncey Gardner-Johnson as that roaming safety. I don't know if I give it a C or C minus, although, yeah, there were a lot of games that the defense gave up that we didn't win. The defense, they would have got a couple of stops. I'm thinking of the Bengals game, the Vikings game, even the Tampa games. The defense, especially the second one, defense makes one of those stops, doesn't give it the big pass interference that Brady is always looking for. You probably win those games with your defense. You did beat them last year 9-0, and that was purely a defensive game. So I can't quibble with that too much, Calvin, but I'm giving them a B just because of how, what they did to the 49ers, for example. 13-0 to the 49ers. I mean, with Christian McCaffrey on that team, and Debo Samuel, they should have scored more than 20 points.
Yeah. They held their last 6 opponents to under 20 points. That ties the franchise record with 2 Dome Patrol, 91-92, the Dome Patrol days. To do that in today's NFL, is a real statement. And it's also a testament to how bad the offense was, both coaching and on the field, because in those 6 games they finished with a 3-3 record.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, exactly. And I get it, Calvin. I agree with you. When you give up that kind of rushing yards, but I'm thinking about, the Steelers game, the Ravens game. The Ravens aside, because we had games like that last year too. Buffalo, comes to mind. But the Steelers game, you shouldn't have given up that many rushing yards. You really did not play good. You were flat offensively and defensively in that game. So let's look at the other side, the offense. We already said enough about Carmichael. I've used the term Sean Payton karaoke ever since I heard somebody mention Saints Happy Hour is on right now. But ever since Ralph Marlboro said Sean Payton karaoke, that's pretty much what it's been. But let's look at the other positions. Talk about not Chris Richard, the kid Cody. I just forgot his name. The receivers coach from Tennessee, who's now
Cody Burns.
Cody Burns. You look what he did with Olave, like you said. Look what he did with Rashid Shaheed. You compare that to last year's receivers. And I love CJ Curtis Johnson. I love that man.
Same.
But Cody Burns brought a new energy, and I think you saw an improvement in the receiving core because of that.
Yep. Hell, even look at Juwan Johnson, because the tight ends partially fall under the tutelage of the receivers coach.
Yeah. But how about Doug Marrone as offensive line coach for the Saints this year? I mean, I wasn't that enthused about that hiring. But how do you feel he did as an offensive line coach for the Saints this year?
I thought he did pretty well, Alan. I like the hire only because Marrone as an offensive coordinator, mid. Yeah. As a head coach, worse than mid. But as an offensive line guy, he is one of the most respected minds in the game. And we don't need to look any further than the development of Cesar Ruiz to know how good a job not only Doug Marrone, but his protege, Zach Strief, did as coaches this year. Not only I saw an improvement, and I've always loved Eric McCoy as a player, but I saw McCoy take his game to a next level, this year as well. So McCoy's continued development, Ruiz shaking off that draft bust label, and I was one of the ones throwing it on him too.
Sure. It's not hard to do. He looks
not at all. Their individual, coaching abilities really shined with those two guys. And with James Hurst too. Hurst, in my opinion, is a natural guard that played left tackle all year. And although we saw him get victimized often down the stretch, he was still serviceable at that left edge. As a unit, the offensive line I thought lacked cohesion at times. Part of that was injuries. I mean, the lineup shuffle will always do in an offensive line every time. But I still thought Marone and Streif did a solid job. Again, I'd give them a C to a C plus. I'll give them a C. Again, because of the development of Ruiz and McCoy. I would like to see more cohesiveness from the unit as a whole going forward, though.
I think if Penning would have been healthy all year, that would have been a good judgment on Marone and Streif, because right now it's I almost want to give him an incomplete, because Penning didn't play enough. I want to see Penning's development, his leap forward, especially in pass protection blocking as a starting left tackle. That's where I want to see improvements, because personally, I think you've got three solid pieces on the offensive line with Penning, McCoy, and Ruiz. I know Ramczyk, I haven't mentioned him, but Ramczyk, I'm really concerned about Ramczyk and his future with the Saints.
I am too.
Because I think the knee problems he's having is because he had a lot of rest days. Every week he had a rest day during the season. I'm curious to see what happens with him.
Me too.
Not that the Saints are going to release him. I don't believe that at all. But I'm getting Max Unger vibes watching him this year. Max Unger, we didn't realize how much he had fallen off until he announced his retirement. Then you go back and look at his play at center and go, yeah, he's getting his ass kicked every week. Ramczyk wasn't getting his butt kicked, but he wasn't dominating like we're used to seeing out of the right tackle position. He looked very average at right tackle. And I know a lot of people were probably like, what are you talking about? But watch him this year versus previous seasons, not 2021, but 2020, 2019, 2018. You look at Ramczyk there, and Ramczyk, it was ragdolling people. Well, JJ Watt,
elite guys. Yeah, exactly.
JJ Watt had 0 stats against him. So I'm curious to see what happens with him. That's why I would not be surprised to see the Saints go for a right tackle or a tackle in the draft again. And people are like, why are you doing that? Because, again, your offensive philosophy. If your offensive philosophy is I want a big, mauling offensive line that's going to clear lanes for my running backs to run through, that's where I'm building. I'm building that wall. And I'm going to build on defense a wall of 8 guys that I can rotate in, fresh pass rushers, but also defensive linemen who push the pocket back into the quarterback's face. And I think that's how Dennis Allen is keeping his job, because that's what he's telling Loomis and Gail Benson and whoever else will listen. This is what the kind of team I want to build. So I'm in an incomplete right now with Marone. Let me ask you, though, about the other positions. Running backs coach, which I can't think of the person's name. I had it before we started the show, and I forgot.
It's not still Rouchar, is it?
No.
Okay. Because I know he was it for years.
Yeah, I got Jim Skipper on my mind, and Jim Skipper hadn't been a Saints running backs coach since Jim Moore years.
Right.
But let's talk about the rest of the offense. So running backs, tight ends, and we talk about receivers, offensive line, quarterbacks too. As far as coaching, what kind of grades? Look at that smile on your face. What kind of grades would you give those guys? The tight ends and running backs first off.
I'd start with the letter of the word that I used often when I watched the Saints this year, letter F. I think as a whole, the offensive staff, you got to give them an F.
Yeah.
we mentioned 6 straight games of under 20 points.
Mm-hmm.
8 of their last 9 were 20 points or under, and they had a 4-4 record in those games.
Yeah.
The offense averaged 12.3 points per game in those games, and that's with the defense scoring a touchdown.
Mm-hmm.
I think during the second half of the year, last 9 games, in the second half, the Saints averaged 6 points. 6.
Yeah.
Those numbers speak for themselves. You have no choice but to give them an F.
Yeah.
I love what Cody Burns did with the receivers, and I'm including Juwan Johnson in that side of the conversation.
Mm-hmm.
Marone and Streif did a better than serviceable job with the offensive line. But running backs, you have Alvin Kamara, the face of your offense, the focal point of your offense, and you couldn't get him in space all year. Part of the lack of production is on Kamara. I will certainly admit that. And I've questioned his effort at times this year, but the lack of times that we saw the Saints not throw a screen pass or a swing pass or line Kamara out wide, that's coaching, folks. And I know people have tried to argue with me, well, what about the injuries on the offensive line? Yeah, okay. Well, then you line them up wide. And you get the ball out to him quick. You do something to get your most dynamic player in space, to get him in space. And this team just didn't do that. That falls on the head guys, the position coach of the running backs, the offensive coordinator, and Dennis Allen, as the head coach. I don't know this to be fact, but when a head coach gets fired because something goes awry, in college or professional, it's called a lack of institutional control. Why? Because what flows uphill. In this case, and Dennis Allen, whether he's an offensive guy or not, he oversees the offense. He oversees what the offense does. So he has the prerogative to step in and say, I don't like what you're doing, change it. Even if you don't understand the offensive side, you don't. At that point, you don't make suggestions. You just say, I don't like what I'm seeing. So you simply do something different. And we did not see anything different from the Saints offense all year long. It was the same old week in and week out. But I do blame Dennis Allen in part for that, because again, you're the man in charge. You went into, when you hold 1-score leads at halftime, you go into an offensive shell like you were ahead by 25. Why? Because y'all ain't that good. So that's why I blame. I will include Dennis Allen in that F for the entire offensive staff.
Yeah, I kept thinking about, and this is why I was thinking about the running backs position coach. When Sean Payton was here, you had undrafted guys like Pierre Thomas, Chris Ivory, Kerry Robinson. Even as much as I couldn't stand him, the little swing, number 39, little swing running back. Travaris Cadet. You had undrafted guys have an impact on the team. You haven't seen that. You haven't seen an undrafted free agent running back do anything with the Saints. Everybody had a lot of hopes for the Baylor running back. He's not even in the league.
Right.
You went through, it felt very 2010-ish from the standpoint of bringing running backs off the street to try and get something going. Guys who just didn't work anyway. Benjamin, really didn't see much out of him. David Johnson, not much. I think he put the ball down one time on the ground. So, after a big run. So, I mean, Mark Ingram, he was a shell of himself. It was Ingram has been in here for a year too long.
Yeah.
I was glad he came back. He got the rushing title, but it was time for him to retire. He didn't have any tread left on his tires, and it showed this year. So I was really disappointed in the development of any other running back to go along with Alvin Kamara. I wanted Dameon Pierce so badly from
Me
Florida.
too. Me too.
I really, really did this past year. I was so mad we didn't get him. But you needed another running back on this team, especially if that was going to be your philosophy, knowing the weaknesses you had at quarterback. Okay. Even if Jameis would have been your starter all season long, Jameis is less effective without a consistent power running game. That's just the reality.
Yeah.
You cannot avoid that. Only Drew Brees can, or a quarterback like that. Why did the Buccaneers lose so badly against the Cowboys? They couldn't run the football.
Mm-hmm.
You know, every game we beat the Buccaneers, we beat them because we made Tom Brady throw the ball.
Mm-hmm.
When we lost to the Buccaneers, they were able to run the football just enough to win the game, especially that playoff game.
Yep.
I will forever hate Jared Cook because of that.
Yep.
But yeah, I mean, that's the reality. Unless you have an elite quarterback like Aaron Rodgers in his prime, or someone who likes to throw the ball all over the damn field, John Elway in his prime, you can't win. Dan Marino is another one. You just can't win football games consistently without a running game. And
right.
I fault that on the coaching staff. I fault that on the scouting. I fault that on
Mm-hmm.
the roster building by the front office. Tight end, we gave up a couple picks to take Adam Trautman. Adam Trautman's like a poor man's Josh Hill, who was an undrafted free agent.
Mm-hmm.
He's being outplayed by Juwan Johnson. So that's a problem on the team. So while I am in total agreement with the coaching problem, I also blame the front office for not putting together a good offensive team.
Oh yeah.
For Carmichael to try and coordinate. I think Carmichael got stuck calling the same 12 plays every week because he looked at his team going, well, I can't run that play. Can't run that. Can't run that because I don't have the guys that can do those, In fact, I was surprised when I started seeing Adam Prentice actually try and run the fullback short yardage play, which, Zach Line, John Kuhn. You just go down the list of all the running backs, going back to Mike Corning, all the fullbacks that Peyton loved that play.
Yep.
He loved running the fullback on short yardage. I was so glad to see Adam Prentice get like 4 carries in a game. I said, okay, we're going to go old school here. We're bringing back Larry Zonka. We're bringing back Franco Harris. We're bringing back old school, run the fullback, But yeah, that's on coaching too. You need to start running more and more. You need to develop more plays. You need to start doing more things, more creative things, or find players who can do that for you.
Without it.
So I'm in agreement with you on all the coaching staff. I think that's why people get impatient. They want to see new position coaches, beginning with the offensive coordinator, to come in and kind of revitalize this team. But also you want to shake it up. You want to get new players in there and start doing new things with these guys. I don't even know who the quarterback's coach is, honestly. I knew it was Joe Lombardi. I have no idea who the quarterback coach is this year.
Yeah, I don't either, and I had my coaching roster actually at my fingertips last week, but I don't have it near me tonight. But it is what it is. We'll throw f bombs at the nameless guys.
Yeah. It's funny. Mickey Loomis says this team doesn't need to be blown up. I think Loomis is going to give that kind of lip service, but I think he knows it needs a total overhaul. I think that's part of the discussions they're having this week, and I agree it needs to be rebuilt. I don't think you can rebuild it by trading players away, though.
No.
That's something that Saints fans have to get over too, because again, just like with the Sean Payton trade, they think we can just offload all these players they don't like anymore with these huge contracts and get first round and second round picks for these guys. And it's just not going to happen. Draft picks are far, far, far too valuable now.
Yep.
Teams don't give away first round picks anymore.
Nope. It ain't Madden.
No, it's not Madden, and it certainly isn't the old school, because of the big contracts, the salary cap, and the way they, the rookie caps. You want those high draft picks. You want that first round pick to give you the 5 years of a cheap contract.
Yeah.
Where you can use up a player if you want to, essentially. So that's the hard part about this. You're going to have to build through the draft and carry yourself over with some free agents who are going to be bridge guys, not long term stars. Last question, and then I want to give an update on Sean. Last question for you. Much has been made about Lamar Jackson not showing up at the Ravens playoff game, and he is going to be a free agent effective what March 1st. Um, what is your thoughts on this? How do you think this plays out? Because I'm starting to see Saints fans more and more talk about Lamar Jackson coming to the Saints. I have my own ideas, but I want to get yours first.
First of all, let's stay in the real world, folks. Lamar Jackson is not getting out of the Baltimore Ravens building. I've not seen or heard any evidence that the relationship between Lamar and Coach Harbaugh is fractured. There's some communication issues there. Clearly, no doubt the Ravens dropped the ball by not coming harder to the negotiating table with Lamar.
His mom is his agent. Did you know that?
What's that? Yeah.
Lamar's mom is his agent.
Yeah. Like it or not, Deshaun Watson set the quarterback market with all that guaranteed money, followed by Russell Wilson. I don't remember which deal came first, but basically Lamar and Russell set the quarterback.
Yeah, Watson's deal came first, then it was Wilson.
Okay. They both set the quarterback bar for guaranteed money. So, at worst, the Ravens will end up franchise tagging Lamar, but he's not getting out of that building. For Saints fans that want a quarterback like Lamar Jackson, why'd you draft Chris Olave then? Because you don't need elite wide receivers when you got a guy like Lamar. You need a beefy offensive line, which the Saints could potentially have, and a deep core of running backs, which the Saints do not have. Lamar Jackson is simply not a fit for the Saints personnel. We don't know who the offensive coach is going to be, even whether it's Carmichael or somebody else. In my opinion, the Saints just do not have the personnel for a Lamar Jackson to be effective here. But I think that's irrelevant because, like I said, he's never getting out of the city of Baltimore. John Harbaugh revamped his entire offense. He went from Joe Flacco, a ball-controlled passing game with deep shots and a lot of play action, to basically a modified wing T formation with Lamar Jackson. He is not going to tear that up and start all over by letting that man get out of the building. They're going to ride Lamar Jackson until his legs fall off.
Yeah, and my opinion about Lamar Jackson is he's approaching Cam Newton territory.
Yes, sir.
As far as taking hits and getting beat up. People don't want to talk about that, but how would you feel as Saints fans? Let's just say Baltimore lets him get out of the building. The Saints sign him to, I don't know, a $300 million contract with 275 of it guaranteed. All right. And he gets injured and he only plays 9 or 10 out of a possible 34 games. That's 2 seasons, 34 games. He only plays 9 or 10 games. Look at what the fans are saying about Michael Thomas right now. And that's about how many games Michael Thomas has played past 3 years. Yeah, here we go. You're missing some games. And he's getting older. I think that's a recipe for disaster. I don't want any part of Lamar Jackson. And it's not a knock on his ability or anything like that. But your chance to get Lamar Jackson was in 2018 when he was on the draft board.
Yeah.
This is not a Drew Brees situation where they've got somebody in the building and they're ready to push somebody out the door. You got a better shot of maybe getting a 49ers quarterback right now than you do Lamar Jackson.
No question.
And I've seen the Trey Lance talk. And Trey Lance, I have no feeling for Trey Lance because I think he was overdrafted to begin with because he only started 1 year of college football. And he was drafted based on potential. but I also don't think the 49ers are ready to give up on him yet.
No.
I think if they let anybody go, they let Jimmy Garoppolo walk out the building and let Lance and Purdy fight it out.
Yeah, and I think that's what'll happen out there.
Yeah. So you're not gonna. Yeah. You're right. Thomas is about 10 games in 3 seasons. He played 1 game this year, didn't play any last year, and he played the first game, and he played most of Taysom's starts in 2019, 2020, and then he played the playoff game. So yeah, so you're not getting a whole heck of a lot. Yeah, and I wasn't about to say that, but yeah, it just at this point the Saints just need to draft a quarterback. You might be able to find a bridge guy, but you're not going to. There's not another Sean. I mean, there's not another Drew Brees sitting out there right now. There just isn't. Drew Brees was a unique situation. The only thing you can get is a car if you can get him to renegotiate his deal as part of a trade. You have a car, you can get Jimmy G, or you are going to go with Andy Dalton and drafting a guy, with Andy Dalton starting until the guy is ready to start playing. Because I'm not touching Zach Wilson. He's got jets all over him, and Calvin, if you get Carr, let's say you get Carr and you stink next year because everyone thinks that, we don't make any offensive changes. Dennis Allen is worse than ever next year. You got a possibility of getting Caleb Williams. So look at it that way, and the only reason why I say Carr is because Carr is a starter. That's the only kind of starter you probably can get a hold of. You're not going to get, I can't think of too many starters out there who, Baker Mayfield, Sam Darnold. I mean, that's what you're looking at out there.
Yeah, and I'm running it back. I'm running with Dalton before I would either of those guys.
Yeah, I mean that's kind of where you are. I'm just look at the playoffs. Even I thought I saw a great meme. The Miami head coach, he was like that guy playing Madden, and he's scrolling through all the plays trying to figure out one, and then he just hits Ask Madden, but he runs out of time. He's got to call timeout because he's going to get delay a game. Again, that's play calling. That's the weakness of a play caller. It's the brilliance of Sean Payton. He was already 3 plays ahead, and here's this guy scrolling through. What play am I going to run on 4th and short? I get a damn delay of games. Now it's 4th and 6. Brilliant. Miami deserved to lose that game.
Oh yeah. Yeah, Buffalo tried to give it to them.
They did. Buffalo let you hang around. That's for sure. All right, so last thing, and I didn't want to start the show with this because I really wanted to get all these other things talked about, but I posted this 5 days ago, and today I wanted to talk about it a little bit on the show. So it's news about Sean, and it's not good. Sean, as we talked about last week, he is actually in hospice care. His mom has been visiting with him, and he's in the final stages of respiratory failure. They figure that this is what I was afraid of too, the smoke inhalation. When he was on that breathing tube for such a long time, the smoke inhalation had damaged his lungs that much. I'm sure he breathed in embers too. He's struggling to breathe on his own. They've got the tube out, but it's hard for him to breathe. He's got about 5 to 6 months left to live, unfortunately. And he is in hospice care at the Mid Medical Center in Midden, Louisiana. I'm going to try and visit him this weekend. I can't guarantee it, but I'm going to try. It's about a 5.5 hour ride for me by car. but yeah, I want to see him. I've talked to his ex-wife. She brought his kids to go see him, and one of the things she said about him is, she saw him when he had cancer, and he looks worse than he did when he had cancer, as far as how thin he looks and just how weak he looks. Um, I really didn't want to pass that kind of news along to anybody and then start a show. I wanted to save it for the end, but all you people who are praying people, religious people, please keep praying for Sean. He's not in a lot of pain. He's actually semi healing from the burns and everything. It's just his body is struggling to stay alive, and it's really his breathing. Um, but I want to see him. I, I'll leave it up to him not post pictures after I go visiting, because from what she described, it's better. I want you guys to remember Sean the way he looks, the way you picture him in your mind right now, not how he really is now, because he just doesn't look like himself. But anyway, please pray for Sean. That at best that he beats this, because he beat cancer. At
Hmm.
best he beats this, and he can somehow live on his own. But if he can't, that he goes peacefully and pain free and not suffering these final months. So I hate passing that along to you guys, but I feel like I owe it to you, everybody, because this was his baby. This was his
Yeah.
show.
Yeah.
Um, Bob and I are just visitors. This is Sean's baby. Sean approached me years ago. I can't believe how long we've been doing this. 7 years, I think now. Um, and I didn't know Sean from anybody. Sean just like, I like the stuff you write about on the Saints board. Hey, would you be interested in doing a podcast with me? And I've never did a podcast before, and here we are. All these years later. Um, so please pray for Sean. Uh, Bob, what do y'all have going on for Bite Blitz tomorrow night?
It continued post-mortem for the Saints season. We're going to talk about the divisional playoff matches, probably give predictions, knowing us. But yeah, a lot of the same things that you and I are going to continue to talk about through the coming weeks too. I think it's way too early to speculate on personnel movement at this point.
Mm-hmm.
So it's probably more advantageous, for both Under the Dome and Bayou Blitz to just grade what we saw out of the Saints. Maybe try to put a positive spin on it, because there were some positive signs to look forward
Absolutely.
to 2023. And just this kind of thing. And Sean Payton is going to be news until he isn't. So we'll continue to speculate about that. Thank you for the update on Sean. I talked to Michelle too. Yeah, she's done a great job keeping us both updated. Sean, if you are still up late watching this, I love you, brother. I know you're going to keep fighting, and I know you have the ability to beat this. But as you're fighting, know that all of our love and thoughts are with you.
Absolutely. It's funny as you were talking about that. I'm looking in the background. John Gilliam went running by number 42 for the Minnesota Vikings. That's the stadium, same player, former Saint, where he returned the opening kickoff for a touchdown as a rookie on the first
Hmm.
play. Saints couldn't figure out what to do with him, but the Vikings sure as hell did. They made him a receiver, and
Yep.
he became one of the top deep threats of the league, and got played in two Super Bowls. This is the
Hmm.
last Super Bowl with the Vikings. Um, but yeah, so that's Foreman right there, Chuck Foreman, 44. But anyway, thank you guys for joining us. We go an hour and a half, and I didn't think we had that much to talk about. But
You're
and I know
killing me,
you're.
man.
I know, I know. We when we start going on, the playoffs, and then talking about coaches, yeah, it gets to be long. But yeah, we're gonna, like you said, we're gonna go into the different positions and the breakdowns just like you are. So please check out Bayou Blitz tomorrow night. It's our sister podcast. And Bob, thank you for staying awake with me for this hour and a half. And we'll see you next time on Under the Dome. Good night,
Good night,
everybody.
everybody.